The naturalization exam gives people a lot of anxiety because you're going to be tested on your knowledge of certain questions and answers in front of an immigration officer. This video is all about this topic. We're going to discuss what the exam looks like and how to qualify for certain exceptions to the language or civics test portion of the exam. We're also going to generally describe the interview process, but I have another video on this topic that I'll link to at the end of the video. I'm Puyan Darian, an immigration lawyer here to talk about the naturalization test. One of the very first questions that I get from people who hire me to do their naturalization application is whether they need to be studying the 2008 citizenship exam materials or the 2020 exam materials. And for most people who have recently applied for naturalization, especially if you're applying after the date that this video airs, you're probably going to be taking the 2008 version unless something dramatic changes or there's a new version of the study materials. The 2008 materials are available on the USCIS website. I'll put a link in the description below where you can just get a PDF file, and it's basically 100 questions. The questions are there and the acceptable answers are also listed in the PDF file. You basically need to learn these 100 questions and answers and be prepared to answer them in front of an immigration officer. So what does the exam actually look like? It's pretty straightforward. You'll be walked into a small interview room by an immigration officer, and they'll typically go through your naturalization application with you. If you applied based on the 3-year provision, which means you're married to a US citizen and you were eligible to apply for citizenship early, there might be some additional requirements where you'll need to submit additional evidence, and you'll go through it with the officer during that interview. But if you're applying based on the 5-year provision, which means you've been a resident for 5 years and now you're applying for citizenship, like most people, then it's pretty easy. What happens next is the officer will just begin asking you the citizenship questions. They'll randomly select 10 of the questions. If you answer 6 correctly, the oral portion of the exam is over. Also, during this entire process, the officer is speaking with you in English to see if you can understand English, because that's a requirement for naturalization. And that requirement continues to be true up until the moment that you are actually sworn in as a US citizen. After the oral portion of the exam, which will literally take 5 minutes, they will ask you to write 1 or 2 sentences in English. Typically, there's like an iPad or a tablet device there where you can write it down. And after that, if everything goes well, you'll typically just get a piece of paper that says, "Congratulations, you've passed the exam portion. Just wait for another interview appointment notice in the mail." And typically, for most people, they'll get that notice a few months later, and their swearing in ceremony will be scheduled on that second notice that they receive. So a question that I get all the time is something along the lines of, "Hey, my mom is really old. She's been a permanent resident for a really long time. She wants to apply for citizenship, but she can't speak English. Can she still apply?" And the answer is maybe. So if you've been a permanent resident for more than 20 years and you're over 50 years of age, you might qualify for a version of the exam that's in your native language. For example, you would take the Spanish version of the exam, but you would still be required to practice and answer the questions in your native language. There are other provisions. For example, if you're over age 55, we only need to show that you've been a permanent resident for 15 years. Now, what if you are just super old or very disabled in a way where you can't learn new information or you can't take the exam in English? For example, I once had a very old client. She was like 90 years old and she was undergoing radiation, and she also had age-related memory loss. So we actually had physical diagnoses, medical diagnoses from a physician, and we had her examined, and a physician filled out a form applying for an exemption from the examination procedure. and this was granted. And basically, she didn't have to take any test whatsoever and became a citizen right after we went through the whole process. It wasn't that easy. We had to have a physician go through the entire process. USCIS initially wasn't satisfied and asked a lot of questions. We had to amend it and get supporting documents, but eventually the USCIS supervisor signed off on it, and we were able to get her citizenship at age 91 without her taking any exam whatsoever. If you are considering applying for a complete exemption from the English and civics requirements, which means you won't be tested whatsoever to become a citizen, just know that you need a real medical diagnosis, and it's not really an easy process. I've had to work with doctors and it's involved. Like, we had to do several back and forths to prepare a package that USCIS is willing to entertain and actually approve. So it is very doable if you have a real condition, but if it's just more difficult for you to learn English, it's gonna depend on the exact diagnosis and what evidence you have of your disability. All right, guys, that brings us to the end of the video, but if you stuck with me this far, I have a bonus tip. If you fail the citizenship exam, you actually do get a second opportunity to take it 120 days later. Now, you should definitely prepare between the first time and the second time if you fail, because if you fail it the second time, your citizenship is denied and you basically just lose your filing fee of $725 right now. You can reapply 1 year later. So you would lose a lot of time and your filing fee. All right, guys, if you want to apply for citizenship and you need any assistance or you have any questions whatsoever about this video, I'm available to prepare your application, answer all your questions, and guide you through the whole process. If you have specific questions about naturalization, put them in the comments below. I'll answer them and I'll try to incorporate them into future videos. Be sure to subscribe and I'll see you next week for another video.